The brain starter here is just asking for the amplitude, frequency, and period of y equals 3 sine of 1/2 x. Pause your video now so you can get the answers to those. For the amplitude, you look at this value right here being multiplied. So the amplitude in this case is 3, which means that the sine graph goes between -3 and +3. The frequency is this number with the x here. So the frequency is 1/2, which means over the course of 2 pi, it goes through 1/2 of a sine cycle. The period is 2 pi over the absolute value of 1/2, which is just 1/2, which gives you 4 pi. And that means that a full cycle is completed over the course of 4 pi. Now we're going to consider a few more variables in our sine and cosine graphs. So, originally we know that A is the amplitude, the B value next to the x is the frequency, and using the B value we can find the period by doing 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. Now, there's a thing called a horizontal shift, also called a phase shift, which moves the graph either left or right. And that is determined by the C value. So specifically, you take C over the absolute value of B. Now, like quadratics, if the graph moves left, that's when C is positive. If the graph moves right, that's when C is negative. So it's opposite of what you would normally think, where right is positive and left is negative. Now, there's also vertical shifts that can happen, and that's controlled by this D value right here. And if the D is positive, it moves the graph up. If the D is negative, it moves the graph down, just like you would think, and also just like quadratics. Now the question is, what moves up, what moves down? Specifically, it's this line in the middle of the graph, so right in the middle, between the maximum and the minimum. There's something in the middle called the midline. In this case, it's sine of x plus 1, so the midline moves from the x-axis of 0 up to y equals 1. Now we're going to consider the graph of sine of x plus pi over 2 minus 1. Pause your video and think to yourself, which directions will this positive pi over 2 and this negative 1 shift the original sine graph? Okay, first I'm going to start with this vertical shift because I think it's easier. So you see how the original sine graph starts at 0? If we go down 1, it means that the new graph will start at -1. Likewise, this point of 1 goes to 0, that 0 goes to -1, -1 to -2, and so on. So this is generally where the points are going to move, based on the -1 shift. We'd have a curve that looks a bit like this, but I'm going to erase that now so we can deal with the other shift as well. So now when we look at this positive pi over 2, that means we move everything left by pi over 2. So this point here goes off the chart. This point moves back to here. This point goes to here. This point back here. This one back there. This point goes here. And I think you see the idea here. Moving every point to the left by pi over 2. And now when we connect these final red points, and we can also just continue the pattern to get that last point, connect these final red points, we'll have the graph of sine of x plus pi over 2 minus 1. Remember to connect it with a smooth curve that's probably better than my curve. So if you look at it, everything moved to the left by pi over 2, and the midline shifted. The midline is now right here at y equals -1.